Trackhouse Racing and Roshan are still the favorites to potentially land a Busch sponsorship for 2024, and Joe Gibbs has sold a minority ownership stake. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to go ahead by starting to talk about Todd Gillen. As it was announced on Monday evening, Todd Gillen is officially sold out on sponsorship, as Serial 1 has added 3 more races for Todd Gillen this season. They'll sponsor him in Nashville, they'll sponsor him in Watkins Glen. I can remember the other race they're going to sponsor Todd Gillen, but it's really good to see that Todd Gillen will have sponsorship and funding for the rest of the 2023 season. Obviously, a lot of talk about Todd Gillen's future, but nonetheless, really happy and glad to see that Todd Gillen is sold out on sponsorship with Serial 1. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Jack Daniels. As it was announced yesterday, reported by Adam Stern yesterday, that Chicago has partnered with Jack Daniels, which will sell its new Jack and Coke cocktail. Really cool to see a Jack Daniels getting back into sport a lot more frequently. Obviously, Jack Daniels back in the day, in the 2000s, was a big sponsor for Rich Schultz Racing, but they haven't sponsored a NASCAR Cup Series car, I believe, since 2018 or 2019, when they sponsored Austin Dillon. Nonetheless, it's glad to see that they're back in the sport in some shape or form, and glad to see Jack Daniels is partnering up. Really awesome stuff, to be honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about pace cars for Chicago Street Course. Something interesting going to be happening with the pace cars for this year's Chicago Street Course. So NASCAR is going to rotate cars from each manufacturer, and Cup qualifying will determine the order. So, for instance, if a Chevy driver like Kyle Larson ends up winning the pole for the race, they would basically have the Chevy starting on the pole, and then basically they will rotate the manufacturers in order. So, for instance, I think the second highest qualifier manufacturer will have the second pace car. It's very interesting to see it in practice, and I'm really looking forward to see how this ends up working, because I like it they're doing this, and it's a very interesting move, in my honest and sincere opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Camping World. As it was announced on yesterday, the Camp World will return to sponsor the SRX as an entitlement sponsor in 2023. Now, Camp World has sponsored, I believe, the first 2 seasons of the SRX. There was a lot of talk. There was a big announcement coming from the SRX. Well, it sounds like Camp World was that big announcement that is going on with the SRX this season. Obviously, there's a lot of excitement around this year's SRX season. You've got drivers like Haley Deegan running this season. You've got Kevin Hart, Kyle Busch running some races. You've got other drivers that are running, like, Julio Castroneves running a couple races. Glenn Boyer's running a few races. You've got Denny Hamlin running some races. Daniel Suarez, Brad Keselowski's running the full championship. Tony Stewart, of course, running to get another championship. I think it's going to be a very exciting season, and glad to see, nonetheless, the Camp World is returning to go ahead and sponsor the SRX in 2023. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about NBC Sports. As it was reported, I believe, by Dustin Albino, the NBC Sports will have a post-race show after every race of at least 30 minutes every week on Peacock. Even though it's going to be on a pay-per-view, I'm really glad to see there's going to be more post-race, because one thing I've been frustrated is the fact there's so much pre-race that there's not enough post-race for a lot of the races. Even though it's going to be on Peacock, I am glad to see that there is going to be less, basically more post-race, because post-race is actually something that we all basically do. I do a lot of the post-race race reviews, but overall, I think this is a very good decision. I think it will work out a lot better for the sport in general, and I think this is the right decision overall when it comes to this, because the more post-race you have, the better it is for the sport. Very happy and glad to see that NBC will be doing that, even if it's on Peacock. Very happy to see that they are going to be doing that. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about F1. As Adam Stern put out a tweet talking about F1, and there was, I think, from an Auto Week article, if I'm not mistaken, but it's basically talking about F1's predictable races risk turning off new American fan bases. Obviously, this season, Max Verstappen, I believe, has won 6 or 7 of the 8 or 9 races we have ran so far, and has like a 74 or 75 point lead over the rest of the field currently at the moment. Now, like I said, Max Verstappen's pretty much won every single race, but when you have a driver like Max Verstappen who's dominating every single race, people are probably going to get turned off, because a lot of the new fans that come in have come in from Drive to Survive. And in 2021, you had some really awesome and amazing racing going on. Unfortunately, that is not the case anymore when it comes to Formula 1. And when you have a driver dominating as much as Max Verstappen and basically not good racing behind him, because it's really not good racing happening, you're obviously not going to have a lot of people tune in, and less people are going to start tuning in, and they're going to go other forms of motorsport, or in general, they're going to stop watching in general. So I think there needs to be some changes with F1. I don't exactly exactly what you're going to do. Obviously, we talked about this, I think, a couple weeks ago with ESPN, but they were talking about the fact that they were almost didn't want to show the Monaco Grand Prix on ABC because the guy who runs ESPN is saying that the races are really, really boring, and they want exciting racing, which is kind of hard to do with Formula One when it's an aero-dependent series. Something's got to change, and hopefully something does change going forward in the foreseeable future. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Heather Gibbs. As it was reported by Adam Stern that Heather Gibbs has started to get involved in the ownership side of Joe Gibbs Racing in NASCAR in recent months. Heather Gibbs is obviously the mother of Ty Gibbs and basically came into the family a long time ago. But Heather Gibbs, really glad to say that she is getting involved in ownership sake. Obviously, Joe Gibbs is getting a lot older. We're going to talk about Joe Gibbs here later in the episode. But I think this is a really good move. She's probably been at the track a lot more frequently, and you'll probably see her in the media a lot more frequently as well because they're going to have someone that's going to eventually have to take over for the team. Obviously, unfortunately, tragedy, we lost Coy Gibbs last year at the Phoenix Championship race, and we lost JD a few years ago as well, both at the age of 49 years old at the time. So it's glad to see that she's getting involved in the ownership side of things going forward. It's going to be, I hope she can do a really good job on the ownership side of things. We'll talk more about Joe Gibbs here in just a little bit. Nonetheless, so it's good to see that Heather Gibbs is starting to get involved with them a lot more frequently. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Takuma Sato. As it was reported by Nathan Brown from the Indy Star that Takuma Sato is going to run the final 3 oval races for Chip Ganassi Racing in 2023. That means he'll drive the number 11 car at both Iowa races and Worldwide Technology Raceway as well. Now, originally, Takuma Sato was only supposed to run 2 races, and potentially Marcus Armstrong, who's been driving all the road and street courses this year in IndyCar, he was supposed to potentially run some of the oval races this year. But I think one of the reasons that they're keeping Takuma Sato around is because I think he's got some sponsorship and funding. But Takuma Sato did a pretty solid job in those races that he drove for Ganassi, and I think he deserved a shot to run all the races. Now, I think Takuma Sato is going to be one driver to watch for Worldwide Technology and probably someone to watch at Iowa Speedway. I think Takuma is getting opportunities, also going to be testing in the coming days. I think today there's supposed to be a test going on in some of the oval races for the oval races coming up. So overall, really good to see that Takuma Sato is getting the shot and opportunity to continue driving for Chip Ganassi in those select races. Hopefully, he can do a really good job behind the wheel in those final races with that team. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Mason Massey. As it was announced on Monday early afternoon that Mason Massey will drive the 08 for SS Greenlight Racing this weekend in Nashville. Mason Massey was supposed to drive full-time for the Rain Brothers Racing Organization. I'm not entirely sure what happened there because he actually does have that brunt sponsorship and funding. But Mason Massey, I think, is a pretty decent driver, and I think he's got a decent chance to run pretty good this weekend. It would be nice to see Mason Massey contend for top 20 or maybe top 25. Obviously, this car doesn't have as much, basically, points right now, so I think this car still has to qualify its way in, because I think there's 41 cars trying to qualify in for 38 spots, so he'll have to qualify his win because it doesn't have a lot of owners' points currently at the moment. So hopefully Mason Massey can do a very good job and have a good run this weekend and hopefully makes the show at Nashville. As I'm currently editing today's video, it was reported by Joseph Straley there's been some entry-list changes for Ram Brothers Racing as it been announced that Chase James will drive the 33 for the Ram Brothers Racing organization this weekend in Nashville. Now, Chase James has made 2 starts in the truck series in the past. Last year, I believe, drove the 46 truck for Glory to God Racing. I believe in 2021, drove 1 race, I think, at Mid-Ohio or a couple other tracks. I'm not entirely sure. Nonetheless, it's a really great opportunity for Chase James. I think he made the show last year at Nashville. Did have a pretty decent run. So it's a really good opportunity for him. I think this truck has to make it in on points. Nonetheless, so I think this is a really good opportunity for him. Hopefully, he can make the show and have enough points, and hopefully can make the show this weekend in the Truck Series race at Nashville Superspeedway. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Jonathan Shafer. As it was announced yesterday that Jonathan Shafer will drive the 30 for On Point Motorsports this weekend in Nashville. Jonathan Shafer is a driver, is an up-and-coming talent right now. I think he's about 16 or 17 years old, and he's been racing in ARCA West and ARCA East, if I'm not mistaken, and has had some decent success in those respective series. Obviously, On Point Motorsports had some pretty decent runs with drivers like Chris Hacker, but they did take off, I believe, a week ago, basically due to having issues with sponsorship and funding. But this is a really awesome and a great opportunity for Jonathan Shafer. Hopefully he can do a really good job. I think the goal is to try to finish top 20 or top 25. This truck does have enough owner's points to make the show. So nonetheless, hopefully he can do a really good job for On Point Motorsports this weekend at Nashville. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Lane Riggs. As it was announced last night that Lane Riggs will drive the 02 for Young's Motorsports this weekend in Nashville. Lane Riggs made one start so far in the 2023 season. That was with Tricon Garage in the one truck. Unfortunately, things did not go so smooth as he was involved in a wreck near the end of stage number 1. I think Lane Riggs is an extremely underrated driver. Last year, he drove the 62 truck basically for Homer Friesen Racing and led an early portion of that race, qualified up front, and had one of the early great cars in the beginning of that race. I think Lane Riggs honestly could contend for a top 15. This car has capabilities if you put the right driver in it, and this is a great opportunity for him. This car does have enough owner's points to make the show, so very glad to see he's getting an opportunity in his shot because I think he deserves a shot at driving the car, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jake Drew. As it was announced yesterday, or a couple days ago, that Jake Drew will attempt to make his NASCAR Truck Series debut this weekend in Nashville, driving a 66 truck for Thor Sport Racing. Jake Drew used to race in the ARCA West Series for Sunrise Racing, Bob Percotti's team, and I think did have some decent success there. I think he might have won a couple races in ARCA West a couple years ago as well. But I've been wondering what has been the plan for Jake Drew. So this is the plan that they've had, and I think this is a really good opportunity and a great strategy move to put him behind the wheel of Thor Sport Racing. Obviously, this truck's had some issues having bad runs, but I do believe that he will have a decent run this weekend. Wishing him the best of luck, and glad to see he's getting a shot and opportunity to make his debut with Thor Sport Racing. I think this truck needs to make qualifying, and hopefully he can make the field and make his debut this weekend with Thor Sport Racing in Nashville. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Legacy Motor Club. As it was reported by Bob Pockris that Legacy Motor Club's appeal for the point penalty they received is going to be set for 1 week from today, June 28th. Now, for those who don't know the story, a couple weeks ago, I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago, Legacy Motor Club got handed a pretty massive penalty for greenhouse violations, a 60-point penalty that dropped Eric Jones from about 24th for 25th back to 31st or 32nd in points. Now, they have obviously Legacy Motor Club has struggled in the 2023 season, so I'm not shocked or surprised to see that they are appealing the penalties. Obviously, I don't think they're going to win the appeal because now they can only go to a certain amount. I think you only can drop to about 30 or 35 points or 40 points, so maybe they get reduced just a little bit. And another thing to note is that Dave Ellens will be back this weekend for the upcoming race in Nashville. His penalty's been deferred. I think he had a 4-race suspension, so I think he served maybe one of those races or has had it. I'm not entirely sure. Nonetheless, so glad to see that the Legacy Motor Club is going to appeal those penalties, and we'll see if they win. They're likely not going to win, but it's good to see that they're trying, and glad to see they're having the opportunity to try to appeal those penalties. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about NASCAR Arcade Rush. As it was announced yesterday, the NASCAR and Game Mill Entertainment are releasing a new NASCAR Arcade Rush video game. It will be on all major consoles, PS4, PS5, Xbox One, X1 Series S, and it also will be on PC with Steam. Obviously, there has been a lot of talk about the future of NASCAR gaming. This game will not be like a simulation-based game. It's going to be an arcade game. Game Mill Entertainment has made games like Kart Racers, the Nickelodeon Brawl game. They made the NHRA game that came out not too long ago. So they made some games as of recently. There's obviously going to be the new NASCAR 5 update that is actually somehow going to end up being released, and I think they came out because of this announcement. Talking about this, yes, it isn't like a simulation game that we all want, and obviously we know the background of Motorsports Games. Motorsports Games has had a very, very difficult and a terrible time, especially recently. There's been a lot of bad stuff coming out about that company. I've covered some of the issues that have been coming out with Motorsports Games. But I'm glad to see, even though it's not a simulation game, I'm glad to see there's actually a NASCAR game coming out. And I hope it does do very, very well. Now, obviously, there will be none of the NASCAR licensed stuff. You'll have the cars in there, but you won't have any of the current drivers that are involved with it. So that's a little disappointing, and I am disappointed about that aspect. However, I will say I'm glad to see there's actually a NASCAR game that is going to be coming out. Because, again, the NASCAR 22 update that's coming out, which is a year past that, I'm not a big fan of that. However, I am glad to see, though, that there at least is going to be somewhat of a NASCAR game coming out, and hopefully the game can succeed. I might pick that up, and I might try that game here in the future. I'm very curious to see how successful this is. I'm glad to see, though, that there's going to be a new NASCAR arcade game going to be coming out this year. I think it's going to be very similar to the Days of Thunder game that came out about 15 years ago, which, let's be honest, that game was not that very good. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Jensen Button. Now, Jensen Button was speaking to the media for NASCAR media, and Jensen Button says he feels like he'll be racing as something full-time in 2024. However, it will likely not be NASCAR. What he is saying is it likely will be IMSA or the FIA World Endurance Championship. Now, Jensen Button, of course, has made some select NASCAR Cup Series starts already, made his debut at Circuit of the Americas. Next week is going to race at Chicago Street Course, and will race later this year at the Indianapolis Road Course. Now, he does mention that NASCAR should race in Europe with like a companion series like the World Endurance Championship, maybe racing at Le Mans, which would be really, really cool to see. But talk about Jensen Button, obviously there have been some people thinking that Jensen Button could have an opportunity to come to NASCAR to race full-time because Jensen Button had not ruled out the possibility. But it is really cool to see Jensen Button, who did drive the Garage 56 entry and like I said, make some select starts with the 15 for Rico Racing later this year. It is really awesome and great to see that Jensen Button is getting a shot and opportunity to continue driving, and hopefully he can do a really, really good job this year with the teams he is driving for. And again, I think there's a chance with the Garage 56 rumors we've been hearing, there's talk of that guy could run some more, that he'll probably be back behind the wheel of that car going forward. Nonetheless, it's very interesting to see, and I'm glad to see that Jensen Button will have to be driving something full-time. How well will he do? I'm not entirely sure. Nonetheless, so I think it's really good to see that he'll be racing full-time in something next year. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Justin Marks. As it was announced yesterday that Justin Marks will be driving the 10 car for Kaulig Racing next weekend at Chicago Street Course. This will be Justin Marks' first NASCAR Xfinity Series starts in 2018 when he drove the 42 car, I believe, at the Charlotte Roval. Now, Justin Marks, of course, is basically one of the owners of Trackhouse Racing, and Justin Marks has done a very, very good job in the ownership side of Trackhouse Racing. But one thing you know is that Justin Marks, on the side of being an owner, has been driving for Trackhouse Racing's team in Trans Am Racing. And Justin Marks has been winning Trans Am races as well. And guess where a lot of those Trans Am races have been happening? They've been happening on street course types of tracks like the National Street Circuit. Now, when I think of Justin Marks' chance of winning this race, I think he's going to be one of the favorites, especially if it ends up raining. Because remember, 2016, he won that rain race at Mid-Ohio. I think Justin Marks is going to be one of the favorites to win. There's not a lot of guys that do have experience coming to weekend on street courses for the Xfinity Series especially. He probably will be my pick for that race. And I think it is really exciting and really intriguing to see that he is going to be driving that car. I think he's going to do a very solid job. We've seen how good the 10 car has ran at times. Obviously, AJ Allmendinger won at Coda, and Kyle Larson also did go on to win a race earlier this year at a couple weeks ago at Darlington and won the throwback Xfinity race. Did a very good job there. Nonetheless, so I'm really excited to see that he's going to have the opportunity to drive for Kaulig Racing. I think he will do a very good and an amazing job in the 10 car for Kaulig Racing. Really looking forward to the opportunity for him to drive for Kaulig. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Stewart-Haas Racing. As yesterday it was announced, they have made some pretty big personnel and crew chief changes. Richard Boswell, who had worked with Riley Herbst for the last couple seasons, is moving away from working with Riley Herbst and going to be crew chiefing for Chase Briscoe starting in 2023, starting this weekend at the upcoming race in Nashville. Devin Restivo, who had been the engineer for Eric Almirola, will now be the crew chief for Riley Herbst, and Jonathan, the crew chief that Chase Briscoe will be now working with basically track performance and stuff in the upper edges of Stewart-Haas Racing. Look, Stewart-Haas Racing has been needing to make some really, really big changes. And one thing that I've been frustrated with is the fact that why did Richard Boswell, not from the get-go, move up with Chase Briscoe to the Cup Series? If I'm not mistaken, Richard Boswell is also the crew chief for him at BKR Racing in the NASCAR Truck Series, Brad Keselowski's organization back in 2017 and 2018 as well. Why was he not working with Chase Briscoe then? Now, one thing I really love the fact about this move is the fact that Richard Boswell was once again reunited with Chase Briscoe, because Chase Briscoe and Richard Boswell worked together for a few years, and Boswell and Chase Briscoe had quite a bit of success, going on to win 8 races combined in the 3 years. They had basically Briscoe got 9 wins in 2020, but 3 of those wins were with Greg Zipadelli. But they were needing to make some really big changes at the scene, because Chase Briscoe has definitely struggled this year. And I think this overall a very, very good move for the team. No disrespect to basically the crew chief that Chase Briscoe did have, but he hadn't done a very, very good job in my opinion. But I think SHR in general, it's not just a crew chief change that's going to need to happen. There's a lot of things that need to happen. I think this is a first step in the right direction. Obviously, we're going to be talking about that big announcement here later today with Josh Berry. But overall, I think this is a very, very good move, something that has needed to happen for a while. And maybe, just maybe, with both of them teaming up once again, we might be able to see more success with both these guys going forward. I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited to see this move is happening, and hopefully Richard Boswell and Chase Briscoe can get back to the success they had years ago, and hopefully there is a lot of success going forward with Stewart-Haas Racing in the near future. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about India. Now, it's reported by Adam Stern on Monday evening that India is another country that NASCAR is eyeing as part of its international expansion plans. Now, obviously, there's been a lot of talk about international expansion due to the basic success of the Garage 56 entry that went on to complete the 24 Hours of Le Mans. And Ben Kennedy did say that he was looking toward the next 3 or 4 years when it comes to schedule. And one of the areas he's been looking at is the Middle East. Now, something interesting about India, I'm not sure how many people from India are NASCAR fans, but it's very interesting that India keeps getting brought up, because we talk about international expansion going into the future. And obviously, like I said, international expansion is something NASCAR is looking at. Now, I think when it comes to international expansion, I think it's going to basically start here in North America. The first country I think the NASCAR will expand to is Canada with the Montreal track. There's a lot of talk right now that Montreal will be back on the NASCAR Cup Series schedule in the 2024 season, and basically replacing the Auto Club date. While it won't be that early in the year, it will replace that Auto Club date that basically was on the schedule, maybe cutting the West Coast swing just a little bit earlier. But going to talk about others, you got Mexico's also rumored the Autodromo Hernando Rodriguez track might have a shot there. But you've also got to talk about NASCAR potentially going to Europe in the future. We talked about this with Jensen Button, but NASCAR's looking at going to other parts of the world as well, and maybe like the Middle East. Now, talk about India. I think NASCAR, when it comes to India, I don't know if India is the best place to go to. I think if you're going to go somewhere kind of close to that Middle East area, I'd say Japan would be a really good option to go with. Japan does have some good tracks out there, and NASCAR did used to race in Japan. They could race it at the Suzuka circuit or the Tsukuba circuit, which would be really, really good tracks to go to. Or Twin Motegi, which I think has been closed down for a while. But Twin Motegi, get an investor to buy that track back up and use that track going forward. But again, I don't know if India is the best choice, but I do love that NASCAR is looking toward the future, because every major sport, and a lot of motorsports especially, are currently expanding at this moment. And if NASCAR is going to want to succeed going forward, they're going to have to look at expanding their product in the near future. So that's one reason why I think they're looking toward that currently at this moment, is going to different countries. But I'm not sure if India would be my personal first choice. It's going to be interesting, though, to see what happens in regards to India, what other countries they do end up going to. Again, I think it's likely they will be in Canada next year. We'll be having the first Cup International race in a very, very long time. I don't know if the Cup Series has ever raced in Canada before, so if they do expand to Canada, it'll probably be the first time. They've raced in Japan, of course, and they've raced in other countries, but they have not raced in India before. So if India does become a possibility, it would be very, very interesting. But first, I think they should focus on making the racing product here good, and also focus on maybe going to countries that are in North America. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in regards to that, but it sounds like India is a potential possibility for the future for NASCAR. Now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Charlotte Roval. As there's a lot of talk around about the future of the Charlotte Roval, and the Charlotte Roval might go away in 2024, because there is potential shock that the Charlotte Oval could come back for the fall race in 2024. Now, Charlotte came into effect because a lot of people were complaining about the racing in the Charlotte Oval, but that was in the Gen 6 era. With how good the racing has been with the next-gen cars, especially Charlotte, I think Charlotte Motor Speedway has produced some amazing racing on the Charlotte Oval. Look at the racing in 2022 and 2023 for the Coca-Cola 600, and you look how bad the Charlotte Roval race was especially in 2022. I think that's one of the big reasons why there's talk and conversations about the Charlotte Rumble potentially going away. But one thing, is the fact that the ratings are another big factor why there's talk about this, because the Charlotte Rumble races have been dropping huge numbers every single year. I think they're dropping on average 200 to 250,000 viewers every single race, and less people are watching. And for a cutoff race, I think more people are potentially going to watch Charlotte Oval race than the Charlotte Rumble, because road course racing in general, outside of the Daytona road course race in 2021, which had actually the most people watch a single race in the 2021 season, basically you're going to have less people that are going to tune into the events every year, because road course racing is not the most popular for NASCAR fans overall due to the old guard. But going back and talking about it, I think this actually probably should end up happening. Look, I do believe that while I do enjoy road course racing in general, I think the Charlotte Oval is going to be better racing product, and I think it'd be a better cutoff race overall, because the Coco 600 the last 2 years has been some of the best racing we have seen. It's always, for a lot of people, been a fan favorite race the last 2 years, and I think it will actually produce a better race overall. Maybe have this as the All-Star race, even as members of Rockingham may get the All-Star race in 2024. But I will say this, when it comes, like I said, to the Charlotte Oval, I do believe they should return to this in 2024 as a fall race and make this a cutoff race once again. Like I said, I know a lot of why we went over to the Whirlwind made a lot of sense back then, but I think now it's probably ran its course, and it's not as intriguing and it's not as exciting as it used to be. It's going to be interesting to see what happens, but like I said, I do believe the Charlotte Oval is going to come back for the fall race, and I think there's a chance it ends up happening. I think this could be the last World race, but I also think there's a chance that it does come back in 2024. But I do believe how bad the ratings have been getting on a year-by-year basis, with the ratings continuing to drop, especially with it being a big NBC race. I would have to imagine NASCAR is probably in talks and conversations with NBC, and they're probably potentially going to return to the Charlotte Oval in the 2024 season. It's going to be exciting. The schedules are expected to be announced here in the coming months. The talk is that it's going to be sometime in August is when it likely will be released. So in the next month or two, we should be finding out. Obviously, we got to get the revenue talks done and the TV deal done before we have the schedule announced. But it sounds like at this point that there's a very, very strong chance, and like I said, a very, very strong possibility and a really strong opportunity that the Charlotte Oval might be gone at the end of the 2023 season, might be going back to Charlotte Oval, which I think should personally happen in 2024, and I think there's a good chance it will happen heading into the 2024 NASCAR Cup Series season. And now we're going to jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode, as we're talking about Busch Beer and Trackhouse. Now, there's obviously a lot of talk about the Josh Berry announcement is likely coming later today. One of the big talking points revolves around a sponsorship, which is Busch Beer. Now, Busch Beer has been a loyal sponsor to Kevin Harvick's, I believe, since like the mid-2000s, when they basically worked with Kevin Harvick with Budweiser. Of course, they are part of the Anheuser-Busch brand. But there's been a lot of talk that Busch Beer may be leaving Stewart-Haas Racing at the end of the 2023 season. And it sounds like right now that Trackhouse Racing is still expected to land the Anheuser-Busch sponsorship starting in the 2024 season, with Ross Chastain picking up that sponsorship and funding. Now, this has been in talks and conversations since basically February, March. One of the reasons why I don't believe that this has been announced at this current moment is the fact that basically what's been going on with the controversies, with the Bud Light controversy, is one of the big reasons why this has not been announced at this current moment. But it isn't really surprising or really shocking that Busch Beer will work with Ross Chastain. It would make a lot of sense, considering the fact that Trackhouse Racing does basically have a driver like Ross Chastain. He's a watermelon farmer. He's a driver who's been up and coming in the ranks. He's been doing a really good job in the Cup Series, even though last week's he has been struggling. But he isn't really surprising or shocking that they are looking at Ross Chastain and Trackhouse Racing. They have a really, really big brand, and it would be really cool to see a watermelon flavored Busch Beer sponsorship. I think it'd be really, really intriguing and really, really exciting. Now, my big question is, when will this eventually be announced? I would have to imagine it'd be coming in the coming years. Now, it'd be really cool if Busch Beer would basically expand their sponsorship and maybe work with Kyle Busch. I would love for Kyle Busch to get that sponsorship as well, because it'd be really fun to have Busch sponsor Kyle Busch and go back to Rich Schultz Racing. I think that'd be really, really cool. But I think it sounds like at this point at Trackhouse Racing, they've had a lot of sponsors come into play, obviously, this year, because Ross Chastain has brought a lot of them in with that Hail Melon move, and Ross Chastain does make a lot of sense when it comes to that Busch Beer sponsorship. That being said, though, like I said, I would love to see it work with Kyle Busch. However, I will say when it comes to this stuff, it is a controversial move. Everything we know about the Bud Light controversy, all that kind of stuff. But overall, when it comes to Trackhouse Racing, it makes a lot of sense. But will they stay around with Stewart-Haas Racing is going to be the big question. Or will Josh Berry bring his own sponsor in, like Jarrett Tire Pros, which have been loyal sponsors to him, but they also remember having also loyal sponsors to Dale Jr. as well. So it's going to be intriguing. It's going to be exciting, and we'll find out when this gets announced. I would imagine that the announcement will be coming in the coming months, and we'll see how much sponsorship they get. I would imagine it'll be majority sponsor for Ross Chastain. Maybe they'll sponsor other drivers, like I said, like Kyle Busch. But it sounds like right now that Trackhouse Racing is the favorite to pick up the Busch Beer sponsorship heading into the 2024 season. It sounds like there's a very good chance it will end up happening. An announcement could be coming very, very soon. Likely, we're going to find out today if they're staying with Stewart-Haas Racing. But it sounds like right now, according to reports and according to sources who've been speaking on the story, it sounds like right now the Trackhouse Racing, according to industry insiders, if they're going to pick the Trackhouse, is going to pick up the Busch Beer sponsorship in the near future. Sounds like that is going to end up happening very, very soon. And now we're going to jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Joe Gibbs and Joe Gibbs Racing. As this story basically came out of nowhere and no one saw this coming. But it was announced yesterday morning that Joe Gibbs Racing has sold a minority equity stake in the team to Harris Blitzer Sports and Entertainment. Harris Blitzer Sports and Entertainment, for those who do not know, which is HBSC, is a company owned by Josh Harris. Josh Harris is expected to take over ownership of the Washington Commanders. Now, one thing to know, and something I have been asked, will the team name change with Harris Blitzer Sports Entertainment coming in? No, the team name will not change. Also, Joe Gibbs and Dave Alpern are still going to be running the operations of the organization. But what this means for the future for Joe Gibbs is that he will be a part owner of the Sixers and the New Jersey Devils, obviously the Philadelphia 76ers and the New Jersey Devils. This is an absolutely huge and a major, major story for major reasons because this means that Joe Gibbs is getting involved in something else. Look at all the other NASCAR owners we currently have at the moment. Rick Hendrick owns a lot of different things. He basically currently owns kind of an IMSA team currently at the moment, even though that program is likely going to be shutting down for next year, with Jimmy Johnson no longer going to be part of Chevy. You've obviously owns a lot of car dealerships and owns a lot of different brands. Richard Jones, I think, owns some part. I think the Carolina Bull Riders, I think, and I'm mistaken, the bull riding organization for the Carolinas, and also owns a lot of different other brands and things as well. And also you've got other team owners like Tony Stewart, who's involved in NASCAR. He's involved with the NHRA, with Tony Stewart Racing, and also owns the SRX as well. And Gene Haas owns Haas F1 as well. Team Penske owns a rental truck company and owns of course the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and basically is president of the IndyCar series currently at the moment right now. What does Joe Gibbs have outside of this? Well, all he has is Joe Gibbs Racing. But him going to be expanding to work with the Harris Blitzer Group, I think this is really, really huge for the future. And basically, this is huge because the Harris Blitzer Group is basically going to bring in some huge cash flow and bring in sponsorship, which is one thing that Joe Gibbs has struggled with in the past. Remember the Kyle Busch story. Remember, Kyle Busch, live talk about this, he lost his M&M sponsorship. If the Harris Blitzer Group would have come in a little earlier, about a year earlier, we might be talking about Kyle Busch sticking around at Joe Gibbs Racing. We may be having a conversation of Kyle Busch going to Rich Schultz Racing, which, let's be honest, Kyle Busch was probably needing a change of scenery for him to lead the team. It was going to be a change of scenery. But I think this is absolutely huge because the other thing is that basically it makes a lot of sense too when you think about it because Josh Harris is taking over the Washington Commanders. Remember, Joe Gibbs was the head coach and basically was a head coach for the Commanders when I think they won, when of course they were the Redskins time, I think they won some Super Bowls with Joe Gibbs being the coach as well. So I think Joe Gibbs could not refuse the decision to make it there. And I love the fact that Joe Gibbs is finally getting involved in something different. It needed to happen for a very, very long time. And like I said, I'm very glad to see that Joe Gibbs is getting involved in different investments. We always talked about a little earlier in this episode. We know that Heather Gibbs is taking over some of the ownership side. And I think Joe Gibbs is finally realizing, you know what, I got to get involved in something else and start doing something a little bit different and trying to expand into different ventures and stuff. I know that they basically, I think, doesn't Joe Gibbs own a motorcycle team? I can't remember exactly what they do. But we've been seeing Joe Gibbs starting to get a little more invested in different things. And we talk about the future of Joe Gibbs Racing. Obviously, this is a really, really big move for the team. Obviously, sounds like likely that Mark Truex Jr. is coming back to Joe Gibbs Racing next year in 2024. And Denny Hamlin's likely to come back next year in 2024 as well, with FedEx expected to return. And that announcement is expected to come in the coming weeks and the coming days as well. And it means good things for Christopher Bell and Ty Gibbs as well, because they're going to both have both of their drivers that have been really, really big mentors for both of them and be able to help them out in a major way. But like I said, this is a really, really huge deal. Now, like I said, they will have the team name. The team is not going to be changing. The only thing that's going to be changing is some sales and cash flow for the team. And Joe Gibbs is going to be a part owner of the Philadelphia 76ers and the New Jersey Devils. So he's got ownership now in an NBA team and an NHL team, and also potentially the Commanders as well. Because a lot of people thought that Joe Gibbs was maybe going to be part owner of the Commanders, take over the Commanders stuff after Dan Snyder basically left. Obviously, Dan Snyder was not a good owner in the NFL for the Commanders, as he struggled basically being in ownership, and they only had a couple playoff runs in the mid-2000s, but the last time they had a shot, it was back, I think, in 2005, so it's been nearly 20 years since they had a shot to be a playoff-level team. That being said, this is a very intriguing move, a very, very exciting move that Joe Gibbs selling an equity stake. He sold a minority stake into the team. It sounds like this is happening, and I'm glad to see that he's gone and done this, because I think you're going to start seeing this, which some people think this could be a bad move overall, because everyone looks at RFK when basically we had the family group come in with John Henry, and then RFK, to be fair, in 2007, they started to struggle a little bit, lost some of their cars. But I don't think the Fenway Group was the major problem with John Henry coming in. I think this is just some more cash flow, and I think this overall could be a really, really good move for the team. We've been seeing more ownership stakes coming in with other brands, and I think it's good to see that Joe Gibbs is expanding to others. Will it be a big factor? I think will be a good move overall for the team. But again, we're going to have to wait and see what happens when it comes to the future of this. But I do think that this could be a really, really good move long-term for Joe Gibbs Racing. Hopefully it does end up being a great move for the team, and they can make some big moves for the team. And this will bring more money in, which of course, obviously, a lot of talk about that TV deal. But hopefully this can bring a lot more money in for the team long-term. Glad to see that this move overall is happening for this team. So, that is going to today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe to the channel, notifications on to survive when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Links description below over that, and comment below your thoughts below on today's video. What are the thoughts about Joe Gibbs selling a minority stake into the company? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about Busch likely headed to Trackhouse Racing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Later today in the early afternoon, I've got another video dropping around the big Josh Berry announcement that's happening later today. Tomorrow on the channel, we're going to have the race picks for the Cup Series race at Nashville. As NASCAR is back this weekend at Nashville. Then Friday, we'll have a NASCAR news video along with the truck race review from Nashville. Then Saturday, I'll have the NASCAR Xfinity Series race review from Nashville. And then Sunday, I might have a double upload day on the channel, but I'm not entirely sure. And then next week, we've got the Chicago Street Course race coming up. Got a lot of intriguing stuff heading toward this way. Got a lot of content heading your way, and I'm really excited for the future of this channel as well. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.